Okay, folks, it's your buddy Mike Messier, and we're going a little old school tonight, folks. This is not a live stream. This is an old school WRESTLERIDE. The streets are empty, and the subject is Don Morocco, greatest Intercontinental champion of all time. Now, I'm going to take a sip of water. I want you to think about magnificent Morocco for a moment. And first of all, I know Don Morocco is currently doing his own YouTube channel and podcast, which is great, making waves. So I'm happy to see Don Morocco telling some stories. He's actually getting better in his storytelling. No offense to Don Morocco, but some of his earlier podcast work, he was just kind of vague, I guess, with his storytelling, but he's gotten much better with his details and his memories, and you know, that's good. So let me get into this Don Morocco Intercontinental Champion narrative I want to present. And this is a topic that I hold near and dear because a lot of times I'll be on, you know, Facebook WrestleLand or Twitter WrestleLand, and there'll be some meme or some, you know, poll, who's the greatest Intercontinental champion of all time? And it's always names like Chris Jericho and Christian, maybe Edge, The Miz. Sometimes if the fans have some amount of respect and intelligence, they'll say something like Honky Tonk Man, or Ultimate Warrior, or Kurt Hennig, or Rick Rude. They might throw you a little bit of something like that. But for the most part, they really don't put Don Morocco on those lists, which is an atrocity, it's a crime, it's a sickness that I'm here to cure, okay? Because if anyone should be on the top of those memes and the top of those polls, it should be magnificent Morocco. And I don't have the exact dates memorized, but I believe Don Morocco won his first Intercontinental title in 1981 with a victory over Pedro Morales. I'm not sure if that was an MSG, Madison Square Garden, or perhaps Philadelphia Spectrum. And then basically the way that I recall it, Morales regained the title from Morocco. And then Morocco went away for a while, which was always something very interesting, that Don Morocco was kind of one of the earliest guys to do that, like to take these extended breaks in his wrestling career, you know, 5, 6, 7 months, something like that. He would go away for a while and come right back to the same federation, you know, and I'm not sure if maybe in one of those off times in that Intercontinental title run is when he went to Georgia and had the feud with Piper. That's a possibility. Some asshole was on my ass, so I fucking pulled over. Basically, he comes back, Morocco does, as a house of fire, and he comes back right away. I think his first match back in the WWF, and it was just the single, you know, the 2 W's at the time, World Wrestling Federation. And he challenges Pedro in a rematch after being gone for quite some time, and Morocco regains the title right away. And, you know, my uncle was telling me that he was a young wrestling fan, and that's when he had started watching wrestling, was when Pedro Morales was the Intercontinental champion for the second time. And when Morocco came back and beat Pedro, it was so shocking because he's like, who is this guy? Because you know, whenever you start watching wrestling, you jump into the middle of a story that's been going on for years and decades, right? And everything seems like it's altering your worldview of events. So when this uncle of mine sees Don Morocco come in and beats Pedro Morales for the Intercontinental title, and the week earlier, you know, Morocco had not even been in the federation. It was very confusing and offsetting to my uncle, but he had to kind of do the research and discover, okay, well, this guy had actually been the guy that Pedro had beaten, and he had beaten Pedro, and all this history. But we're always walking right into the middle of a soap opera that exists before us as wrestling fans. Isn't that interesting? Now, of course, the exception to that in modern times would be something like AEW, or if you go back to 2002 when TNA NWA started, you're kind of there from the beginning, which is why some fans like when new promotions start, because they can start from the beginning. Anyway, I'll get off that tangent and go back to Morocco. So Morocco's got the Intercontinental title a second time, and I really feel like this second title reign of Magnificent Morocco is right up there with one of the greatest championships of all time for any title. And you might say, well, gee whiz, Mike, please explain some other great championship histories. Well, in about 2 seconds, I thought of 3. Ric Flair's, I guess you would call it the Ric Flair, it would probably be the Ric Flair May of 89 to July of 90 title run. So would that be his, I believe that would be his 6th title run, the victory over Steamboat, which I want to say was May 7th in Nashville, Municipal Auditorium over Steamboat at the Wrestle War match. Wonderful match. The 3rd match of the Steamboat Flair trilogy of 89. And then he had that title all the way until July of 1990 when he lost it to the Sting in Baltimore. And I believe that wasn't that July 10th. So basically 14-month title reign, Flair's 6th title reign. See, that's when, another sidebar here, Flair's title reigns, although he got up to whatever it was, 16 or 17 title reigns, some of those early ones were like a year, 8 months, a year and a half, 2 years, pretty respectable. But going back to, so that title run, now you might be saying, well, gee whiz, Mike, so he had it for 14 months, so what? Well, he also had that whole Funk feud in the middle of that. That took up a good portion of that year. He had the whole Luger feud. He had a brief feud with Great Muta in December of 90 and early 91. I'm talking about, late 89, early 90. I'm talking about Ric Flair's title reign as a comparison to Don Morocco's. That's why I'm mentioning it. I said that to say this. That's the new fucking phrase of the day. So Morocco's title run, 2nd Intercontinental title run, look it up. So he gets a title back from Pedro. I think they had a series of rematches, or a few rematches at least. Then once he kind of gets by Pedro in those rematches, he settles in. He's got another feud on the horizon against none other than the Soul Man, Rocky Johnson, who had the wonderful Pisces tattoos on his pectorals. And Rocky Johnson, as we all know, is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's father. And, The Rock's book, by the way, has a great misnomer in it, because The Rock, in his book, The Rock says, he writes, the Ghost Rider writes, that his father won the Intercontinental title. Well, he never fucking did. So no offense, Rock, but your dad never beat Morocco. In fact, The Rock wrote in that book, my father was the first African-American Intercontinental champion. Well, he was not, because he never won the title. But, it is what it fucking is. So, Don Morocco and Rocky Johnson had a hell of a good feud. A great feud, actually. Started with a non-title match on television. And they had this thing where Rocky Johnson put the abdominal stretch on Morocco and was about to get a submission, but Captain Lou Albano ran into the ring and caused a DQ. It was a very controversial thing because everyone thought Rocky had won the title. And then they house showed all the rematches. Now the only problem was for Rocky Johnson, unfortunately for Rocky, Jimmy Snuka was gaining so much momentum as a baby face at this time, having feuded with Captain Lou Albano and specifically Ray the Crippler Stevens Although, for whatever reason, Ray Stevens didn't stick around the WWF much longer after that attack. So the Steamboat Snuka feud, for whatever reason, really never caught much fire, even though it should have. Because, Ray Stevens pile drives Steamboat on concrete. But I'm telling you, unless I'm missing some, Nikita Breznikov, Evan Ginsberg house show results, I really don't think Snuka and Stevens had much of a feud before Stevens went packing, kind of leaving Snuka to wrestle the likes of maybe Captain Lou Albano or a random Samoan. So everybody kind of wanted Snuka versus Morocco. I mean, back then you didn't have these like 100-man rosters in WWF or anywhere. You had maybe 20 or 30 or 40 active wrestlers at the most, probably more like 30, and 10 of those were job guys. So you had like 20 guys, and you still had to throw in tag teams in there and everything else, and that's not including women wrestlers who, at the time were kind of marginalized. You basically had Moolah and a young Wendy Richter and maybe a Judy Martin floating around, or oh boy. But anyway, it was just a different animal back then. It really was. Even the WWF, like in that transition time from senior to junior Vince's. Now what happens next? So Morocco's kind of floating around, and he's just kind of waiting for Snuka to come up and have those Intercontinental title matches. And then they had this whole beautiful angle called Respect or Ridicule was the cover of Victory magazine. If you know what that is, you probably don't. Now I'll have to tell you. Victory magazine was the first ever World Wrestling Federation official fucking magazine, with Jimmy Snuka and Don Morocco on the cover. Oh my God. Jimmy Snuka giving Morocco a leapfrog, and the cover said, Jimmy Snuka and Don Morocco, respect or ridicule. And just back then, things like that meant something. I know they don't mean anything to you now. So you had this whole wonderful feud, Steamboat Morocco. I'm going to do another video about all the times Jimmy Snuka got his ass kicked on television. But basically, Morocco and Snuka had this big fight. Snuka ended up all bloody as usual. And they just toured the fucking circuit, folks. And this is where you've probably seen, no matter how old you are, you've seen Jimmy Snuka launch himself with a Superfly death leap off the top of the cage, crashing onto Morocco's chest. If you've only seen the move, I'm not going to say the spot, okay, because it's not a Young Bucks thing. If you've only seen Snuka crash on Morocco's chest and you don't know the whole story, well, guess what? This was right after that whole Jimmy Snuka Nancy situation, the woman, the girlfriend story. I think their name was Nancy. And, or was it Asia Artego? That's the actress. Whatever the lady's name was. They basically couldn't have Steamboat lose, and they couldn't have him win. Because they're like, oh God, we can't put this Intercontinental title. And I say they, it means Junior, Vinnie Mac. So they came up with this kind of creative compromise where Steamboat technically loses the match because I think he either headbutts Morocco, and the momentum of the headbutt or whatever the fuck hurdles Morocco out of the cage. So Steamboat loses the match, but then he goes out of the ring, gets Morocco, beats him up a little bit, and fucking gives him the Snuka body splash. Well, once again, great for Snuka that he can jump off the cage, because he learned how to jump off cages by jumping off of mountains in Fiji. But it was Don Morocco who had to accept that move, okay? As Mick Foley said at the Hall of Fame speech, I think Foley inducted Morocco. Now we move forth. Once Snuka was kind of out of the way, Morocco was kind of just there. He would beat up like SD Jones on weekly TV, and I think he had some matches with Swede Hansen. He was also Don Morocco during this whole time, especially around the turn of the year from 82 to 83. Not only was he defending the Intercontinental title, he was also often challenging Bob Backlund for the WWF title. And they didn't even call it the world title back then in the programs of the World Wrestling Federation. They were still acquiescing to Ric Flair's NWA world title status. But in any event, Don Morocco, and this is before you had a fucking European title, or a Universal title, or a Cruiserweight, or a US, and all these things, all these trinkets. Back when it was a world champion, or a WWF champion, and an Intercontinental champion. So seeing champion versus champion matches were a big deal. Then you start seeing Morocco challenge BACKLUND. He wins a lot of those matches on cuts. They had tremendous matches. Cuts, you might be wondering. That's when they used to do this weird thing where they would stop a match saying that usually the babyface could not continue because of what they called cuts, meaning he's a bloody fucking mess, yet BACKLUND wouldn't lose the title. So he would lose the match because they're stopping the match, but because he's not pinned or submitted, he would keep his title, which absolutely made no sense then. It made no sense now. But Morocco was screwed a number of times because of that, because of the cuts thing. It was really kind of weird, one of those nuances that doesn't happen anymore, but at the time we hated it. Then we move forth, and Morocco's kind of there, and Hulk Hogan comes storming in, in 1983, December of 83. Morocco's still your Intercontinental Champion. The Iron Sheik gets the title over Bob Backlund, December 26, 1983, with the camel clutch. And we all know the story. January 24th, 1984, Hulk Hogan leg drops his fucking ass onto Iron Sheik. I believe it was 5 minutes and 35 seconds, Madison Square Garden. And Hogan's got this fucking title now, this world title. And Morocco's kind of floating around as the Intercontinental Champion. It might have made sense, in my opinion, for Morocco to remain Intercontinental Champion and be one of Hogan's first challengers as a how do you do to the WWF, but they didn't do that. Instead, they just gave Sheik a bunch of title rematches, and I think Hogan wrestled the likes of George Steele and Big John Studd and so forth. And our good friend Don Morocco lost the Intercontinental title to Tito Santana. I want to say it was February 10th of fucking 84. Apparently the match was not very good, or maybe it wasn't that the match was not good, like there was something wrong with the videotape. So they were supposed to tape the match, but the tape got destroyed or something happened, and they never aired the match on television. You just kind of showed up one day on Saturday morning, my uncle told me, and kaboom shaboom, Tito Santana's your new Intercontinental Champion, which was a little upsetting. Back then, you really did want to kind of have video footage. As of now, you want to have your title changes videotaped so people can enjoy them. I have this theory that title changes that happen without the benefit of videotape or live viewing for the big audience, that champion is kind of buried from the get-go. Case in fucking point, Kevin Nash's Diesel winning the WWF title in 1994 over Bob Backlund in 8 seconds. If you don't allow your new champion to share that championship victory on television live, or in a lesser scenario videotaped, you're really putting them at a disadvantage. You know what I mean? Simple thoughts, simple intelligence will tell you that everything I say is 100% accurate, yet the wrestling world doesn't always do simple things that are intelligent any fucking way. So you might be saying, well, gee whiz, Mike, wonderful stories, but have you proven that Don Morocco is the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time? I think I might have, for people that remember him. This is the problem. It's like, how do you translate this wisdom to the modern day wrestling fan who doesn't understand such things? I guess you'd have to have been there, but it's kind of like, I want to fully translate to you modern day marks and raise your level of intelligence, but it's difficult. because I mean, I'm not going to display a Don Morocco match right now, but I'm just telling you, he was a great champion. He was a heel. Everyone hated him, but you kind of begrudgingly respected him. He used to dedicate the fucking... Well, that came later. He used to do a dedicated pile driver. He was doing the kind of, I called it like the reverse pile driver, or the Hawaiian hammer pile driver. He was doing that, basically a tombstone, before The Undertaker sauntered his ass into the WWF years later. He was doing he was The Rock. They called him The Rock at times. That came later when he went to babyface. He went babyface a few years after this, like, I think 87 he became a babyface, in the summer of 87. So I'm not doing a hell of a great fucking job by my own standard. I'm just telling you that in that 14 months from 82 to February of 84, he really did a hell of a great job with that Intercontinental title run. Most of the time back then, like, a champion would survive, like you could kind of write the script quite a bit, especially with the tag team title. Like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? Like, the Samoans are going to beat the Strongbos, or, you know, Johnson and Atlas are going to beat the Samoans, or whatever the fuck. But back then, you know, with this Intercontinental title thing, it's like, fuck, Morocco survived Rocky Johnson? And you're like, okay, he's going to somehow survive this Rocky Johnson feud, although Rocky was quite popular, don't get me wrong. But how is he going to survive Snuka? You know, because Snuka was not going to get the world title because BACKLUND had it. So they weren't going to match up BACKLUND and Snuka. But you just thought it was a given. Like, no way that Morocco's not going to lose this Intercontinental title to Jimmy Snuka. Well, he fucking didn't lose it to him, okay? So I feel that Morocco's second Intercontinental title reign is right up there with Ric Flair's sixth world title of the fucking two different titles, but Ric Flair's NWA world title run, which I guess officially should have been called a WCW world title run, but they still called it the NWA title run. See, I get very specific, folks. I get very specific at what titles were called at what points, and a lot of people don't. You know what I mean? They just kind of throw everything together, and a lot of people don't understand that, for instance, the dreaded Chris Benoit never held the WWE World Heavyweight title. He held the World Heavyweight title, like the former WCW Big Gold Belt, which was basically the Triple H title at the time. But in my book, folks, no offense, that's not the same as the WWE Lineage Bruno belt. It's obviously not. Your buddy Dolph Ziggler never held the Lineage Bruno belt. Okay? I don't think Goldberg has held the Lineage WWE Bruno belt. He's held the Universal title 2 times. So I like being specific. I like having things accurate, okay, and proper. And I know a lot of you fans just throw it all together in one heap of shit. I mean, even back then, the WWF always made this fucking mistake. You ready? They were always saying Jesse Ventura and Adrian Adonis, former WWF Tag Team Champions. No, assholes. They never had the WWF Tag Team titles. You can find Gorilla Monsoon and all these other fucks trying to tell you that Ventura and Adonis, Adrian Adonis, were former WWF Tag Team Champions together. The East-West connection. The reality was they were not. They were AWA former champions. They contended for the WWF Tag Team title against Gurria Martel, but they never fucking won them. They also like to tell you that Jack and Jerry Briscoe were former WWF Tag Team Champions, which they never were. And I just don't tolerate when they try to tell you fucking lies, okay? I don't have a tolerance for that. I did a video where I pointed out Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura trying to tell us all that fucking Ultimate Warrior was the first guy to have the, or that Honky Tonk Man was trying to become the first two-time Intercontinental Champion on a Saturday night's main event. Another fucking lie. Because as mentioned, Morocco, Pedro Morales, and Tito Santana had already done that by that point. So I'm always finding these inconsistencies, which are basically lies that, you know, the WWF tells you. I point them out. And people, whenever I point out these fucking lies, the wrestling fans say, oh, well, whatever. What does it matter? Well, assholes, if you're going to tolerate lies in your fucking wrestling, what else are you going to tolerate? Okay? A former president leading to a goddamn attack on the Capitol building? Oops, you probably did, didn't you, asshole? So, I'm just pointing out everything I know. Don fucking Morocco, greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. I demand that you agree with me now that you've been educated. If you find yourself not agreeing, I suggest you do your goddamn research and find some Don Morocco, Pedro Morales matches. Find some Don Morocco, Rocky Johnson matches. Find some Don Morocco, Jimmy Snuka matches. And then fucking change your opinion to match mine. Okay? So, it's subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. I went a little old school tonight. We went down a little path we haven't gone down in a while. A little WRESTLERIDE. Greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. Magnificent Morocco. Another wonderful MM in this goddamned world. So there you fucking have it, folks. Mike Messier. Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. The Pro Wrestling Rants, the memories, the tributes, and don't fucking forget to watch Messier Mantra and Mike's original films playlist, okay? Thank you very much.